Okay, so in this video we're going to take a look at the Volvo C30 R-Design as a potentially left field contender for a first car. Now, about 12 months ago we made a video outlining the buying criteria I would use as a driving instructor to evaluate first cars, and I'll put a link to that video in the description. So we use that criteria to assess the Volvo C30 and its suitability for a new driver. So if we ignore the branding, the Volvo C30 is to the Ford Focus what the Volkswagen Scirocco is to the Volkswagen Golf. So both cars share the same platform, along with the Mazda 3, as they were all in the same stable at that time. And yet the Volvo has compromised some of the practicalities of both the Focus and the Mazda 3 in favour of a sleeker styling. And in its day, the Volvo C30 received a lot of praise from the motoring press on the execution of the styling of the C30. And in our design format, they added the wings and war paint to give it a more sporty appearance and to appeal to a much more youthful market than perhaps the Volvo brand had traditionally appealed to. And in addition to the styling features, the R-Design model was also dropped 10mm in its ride height to enhance its handling. Though it has to be said, the conversion to the Volvo brand did lose something of the handling sharpness that has always been attached to the Ford Focus. And the Ford Focus remains, in its latest iterations, one of the best handling cars around, which is obviously why we have it as our training car. But nonetheless, it was a very good platform from which to start building the Volvo C30. So we'll now evaluate the other areas, as we said, that we would look at when considering it as a first car. Okay, so in our original video, the first criteria we looked for was the car's safety credentials. And we talked about the Euro NCAP crash testing safety standards, European safety standards. Now, the Volvo brand has always been synonymous with safety, and in many areas it wrote the rule book for Euro NCAP. And the C30 was actually derived from the Volvo safety concept car. So a very good starting point. So Volvo were used to making larger cars, and when they designed the C30 and the smaller platform, they wanted to build into that the sort of crash protection elements you would get in a larger vehicle. And they spent a lot of work doing that. And so, for example, in the last video, we pondered the point around whether or not a spare wheel in the wheel well would add anything to the rear end protection, rear end shunt, which is one of the most common types of collision on our roads. And I'll put a link to the video in the description here, but Volvo did a lot of work on that, and they designed even the spare wheel in the boot to deform in a certain way so as not to injure rear seat passengers. They also used different grades of steel in the rear construction of the back of the car to deform and crumple. So despite having less space by virtue of being a shorter car, they achieved some very impressive crash testing results, and they certainly achieved the Euro NCAP 5-star safety rating, and probably actually go beyond that. And though it must be said, the Focus and Mazda 3, which share the same platform, would have similarly impressive crash testing results. In addition, the car came with ABS braking and electronic stability programs, which again are crucial for novice drivers who are likely to make errors of judgment on speed, distance, severity of bend, weather conditions, those type of things. So in the sort of very active element of safety, when everything else fails you and you're reliant on crash protection, the Volvo came well stacked, as you would expect from the brand. So a couple of other safety features where Volvo were very much ahead of the curve at this time in their safety design development. Firstly was in the design of the seat itself. So these seats have what they termed whips, sort of a whiplash protection design. So the seat will deform and absorb energy in a collision, and was designed very much to protect the spine and particularly the neck where the head is thrown back. So this was a development ahead of its time, and it's something that has been now adopted by many other manufacturers. And the other area, which again is particularly key for novice drivers, is in the area of side impact protection. So they had physical structures to absorb impact from a side impact. Now, as a rookie driver, errors of judgment on speed and distance when pulling out of a junction or emerging onto a roundabout can make that feature, in combination with the airbag curtain, crucially important. Okay, so moving to the back of the car. This is probably the biggest compromise we made in our choice here against the criteria we outlined in our original video. So in that video I expressed my personal preference for having 4 doors, and my logic for that was, in the event of a collision, I want rear seat passengers to be able to exit promptly, and particularly if front seat passengers are injured, it then becomes difficult getting them out of the way to exit through these doors. So my preference would have been for a 4-door car. However, if you are going to go the 3-door route, then the Volvo C30 is probably one of the better places to be doing that. As we said, they spent an awful lot of time, the Volvo designers, working on the rear of the car and its rear crumple zone, and they managed to achieve the same level of energy absorption as they do on much larger cars. And they have the deforming spare wheel, again, all designed to avoid doing damage to rear seat passengers. In addition to that, they kept it a 2-seat rear compartment rather than the more traditional three bench seat. And by doing that, they've moved each of the seats inboard. So you've come in significantly, so you've got a larger gap between the side of the car and the occupant. And the other benefits of doing that is they offset you slightly from the front seat passengers, so you get a really nice clear view through the windscreen when travelling. Feels far less claustrophobic, and it's helped also with this car. We've got the sunroof as well, so it is a nice airy place to be. As you can see, I'm 6'2", and I've got, for the size of car it is, I've got a surprising amount of legroom behind the driver, and also a surprising amount of headroom for what is a raked coupe styled car. So there are some positives with it. You would obviously get all the usual safety features, such as the belts, head restraints, and full curtain airbag. So it's probably as safe as a 3-door car is going to be. One safety positive to be derived from having just 2 doors and 2 rear seats is that it does limit the number of passengers you can carry. And insurance statistics would suggest that for a novice, inexperienced driver, reducing the number of passengers and thus potential driver distractions in the car is probably a good thing. Okay, so as we said, the Volvo C30 compromises practicality for style, and this rear hatch feature heralds back to early Volvos, the P1800, which was a classic design. But the styling feature does somewhat limit access to the boot space. As you can see, for a GT weekend away car, 2 passengers, a couple of overnight bags, there's plenty of space. Just in the boot floor area here, this is what we were describing in the crash safety videos. So you've got a plastic retaining nut, and this whole floor section is designed in the event of a rear end shunt to move up and away from the rear seat passengers. So again, is all part of the safety design of this vehicle. So the second criteria on our original list was what we termed the elements of see and be seen for a car. And these were very much echoed in the original development of this Volvo safety concept car. And what they recognized, what the designers recognized, was that the decisions you make as a driver are very much dependent on what you are able to see, and also what other drivers are able to see of you. And so they did a lot of work in the original concept car, some of which was carried over into the production model here, some of it inevitably got lost along the way. One of the key areas for me, which I think is fantastic, particularly for a new driver, but relevant for any driver, is that they moved the B pillar, so the pillar here that would normally be alongside the driver's shoulder, and when you turn your head it creates a blind spot. By virtue of the stylish design, the coupe design here, they were able to move the B pillar further back. So when I turn my head to do an over-shoulder check, my view is completely clear. And so particularly for lane changes, moving off and stopping, all of these type of areas, it makes it fantastic visibility, which again for any driver, but particularly as a new driver, it avoids the potential for making those errors of observation and not looking fully into your blind spot. Okay, another key element of see and be seen that we talked about in our last video was clearly the wiper blades and their ability to clean the screen, and we've got some timely rain to illustrate that. So this car has quite modern blade style wiper blades, and it's fitted, this particular car came fitted with Bosch rubber blades, which do a very good job at clearing the windscreen. Okay, so continuing the see and be seen theme to the outside of the car, once again, as we discussed in the last video, we selected a red car on the basis that research suggests these cars are easier to spot for other road users, so it makes it easier for us to be seen. And so obviously when you're entering the second-hand market and you've got to get the engine size, the gearbox you want, and all of the other features you want, colour may not be a matter of choice, but in our case we were looking at a similar specification car in black. Now black cars have been shown to be harder for other people, other motorists, to judge speed and distance. So for a novice driver we prefer to have the red one and make it as highly visible as we can to other road users. Similarly, if we look at a silver grey car here against a grey skyline, a car of that colour can very easily get lost, whereas a red car we hope should pop and stand out from other motorists. Other key elements relating to be seen are in the area of daytime running lights. Now Volvo were light years ahead of the game on this. Obviously in Sweden they have reduced daylight hours, and so by law it was a requirement for headlights to be running at all times. Now obviously the world has moved on, and since 2011 all new cars have been required to have LED daytime running lights fitted, as a matter of course. But as you can see, this is a 2010 car, and so this car actually came fitted pre-programmed for its headlights to run at half brightness. Now the later models, so from 2011, were actually fitted with LED daytime running lights, but this car came originally fitted with halogen front fog lamps, which, given the area we live in, we don't get a lot of fog, so we took the decision just to swap out to the fog light to the Volvo original LED daytime running lights, and then we had the headlamps switched off. And the other benefit this gives you is obviously if headlamp bulbs are running continually, day and night, they burn out quicker. But so by replacing the LED daytime running lights enabled us then to upgrade our headlamp bulbs to a slightly brighter, still perfectly road legal, but a higher output. So again, at night time, we're improving our ability to see further down the road. Okay, so brakes and tyres are crucial safety components on whatever car you drive, and generally speaking the manufacturer's braking system will be more than adequate for the car. Obviously their engineers are best skilled, and the pads and discs that came originally specified are probably of the highest quality, so car manufacturers don't want you going back with squeaky brakes or rattly brakes because the components don't quite fit in the calipers. So as a general guide, the original equipment, pads and discs, will be absolutely spot on. In this case we did do just a slight upgrade, again using very high quality components. So we went with the Brembo extra range of discs and pads, and again it's probably being a bit purist driving instructor, but if you want to work on finessing your braking and getting a real good feel through the brake pedal, you want to have some nice quality pads, so you can then work to develop your skill at modulating brake pressure. The other area, as we said, was tyres, and you're really looking as a novice driver or any driver to have A wet rated tyres. We've got a full video that does tyres in detail, so I'll just put a link to that. But we were fortunate this car came fitted with a matching set of Goodyear efficient grip, which are A wet rated, but also have a B rolling resistance, so fuel efficient as well, which was quite a bonus. And they came well in date stamp, so we checked the 4-digit date stamp, and they were relatively new tyres with a significant amount of tread depth left all round, so we were quite fortunate in our purchase there. But that's the sort of thing you want to be looking at as a new driver. Brakes and tyres, crucially important. Okay, so the engine in this particular car is the 1.6 litre Ford engine. Despite the Volvo badging, it's a tried and tested Ford 1.6 litre 100 brake horsepower engine that you'd find in the likes of the Focus from this era. And it, as I said, produces about 100 brake horsepower, which really for a new driver is plenty. It's a 4-seat car, you're not going to have a lot of weight in it, so that's absolutely plenty. And we'll come on to talk about the characteristics of the engine in a bit more detail. But at that time, as we said, the group consisted of Ford, Volvo and Mazda, and so there are other engine variants. So there's a 1.8 and a 2 litre, which come from the later model MX-5s and similar Mazda model cars, but they will be, the 1.8 would be 2 insurance groups higher than the 1.6. So again, when you're exploring the cost of motoring, that would have a significant bearing on it. This, by today's standards, is very old and simple technology, well proven, tried and tested. As a result of that, they're generally pretty reliable engines, more so than some of the more complicated modern engines. The more complicated something is, the more chance things can go wrong with it. However, having said that, it won't be quite as fuel efficient as a more modern turbocharged engine. A couple of things just to be aware of. It does have a timing belt, a cam belt, which will need replacing every 10 years. And also the auxiliary belts, the serpentine belts, also worth changing at that time. So that's just one potentially expensive element on a car. Just check whether that has been done or negotiate that in the price accordingly. Other things that tend to go on this car would be the coolant header tank has a tendency to crack and lose coolant. So again, as you can see, we've replaced that as a matter of precaution. I'm going to get halfway down the motorway and have that crack on you. Beyond that, if the engine has been well serviced, it has quite a good long life, and so you can potentially get many miles out of these cars. Okay, so on the road, the 1.6 litre normally aspirated Ford Focus engine puts out 100 brake horsepower, which is plenty, as we say, to propel a 4-seat car. You're not going to have huge weight in the car. It's more than capable of propelling the car to road legal speeds. One of the criticisms that was levelled at the C30 at the time by motoring journalists relative to the Ford Focus that it was derived from is that some of the sharpness of the Ford's handling and response had been dumbed down somewhat in the C30. And now, in the context of a car for a novice driver who's developing their skills, that's probably not a bad thing. So the steering rack on this car, for example, is almost 3 turns lock to lock. But that means any sudden input into the steering isn't going to destabilize the car in the way that a faster rack would. And it also encourages good technique. So this car benefits from being driven using the pull-push technique, which you will have learnt for your L test. Similarly, the 5-speed manual gearbox is of an older type and requires good technique. So again, the thumb up, thumb down gear shift techniques you'll have learnt for your L test. I'm respecting that neutral phase, giving it a pause between gears, just a very brief pause. The gearbox in this car really does thrive on being driven in that way. All of the factors which will give a smooth drive, stable drive, which your insurance black box will be very pleased to see. So, as I say, in many respects, the driving characteristics of this car are very well suited to developing your skills post-L test. Okay, so if you're still watching this far into the video, presumably the Volvo C30 is of some interest to you. So we've been running this one now for 3 months, and it's proved so far to be pretty good for a newly qualified driver. Couple of the key things just to check. I mean, the key thing, as with any car, have a look at its MOT history. Now, if these cars have been well maintained, there shouldn't be too much noted on the history. One of the key areas that they all suffer from would be front suspension arm or pin bush worn excessively. It's a common theme you'll see on a lot of them. They will need replacing at some point, so check whether or not that's been done. And another common MOT failure point is discoloration of the indicators, and that merely means the bulbs, the amber bulbs, go a little bit white clear, so it's just a bulb change, but that'll be a frequent failure point for these particular cars. Another area that they all tend to suffer from, and it was a manufacturing fault, is a loose windscreen. So there was some bonding issue with the adhesive at the factory, so pretty much all of them will work loose at some point, which can allow water to enter, and is again potentially dangerous because the bonding of the screen forms part of the structural strength of any car. Probably costs about £100 to have it carefully removed and rebonded, but that's just one to be aware of. Beyond that, as I say, check for normal service history as you would for any car. These are cam belt driven cars, but the change interval is only once every 10 years. But make sure it has been done within that time scale, or negotiate the price accordingly. And as we pointed out in the engine section also, the header tanks, so the coolant header tanks, are prone to get brittle and crack, but that can happen on many cars. So that's about it generally. So beyond that, it should be solid forward-based reliability with a bit of quirky Volvo styling.